as possible, also given that there's so much knowledge in this virtual Teams room. So we will just start with an introduction about ourselves, our work, and then I think there will be ample time towards the end for an exchange. And as we're speaking, also, if there's any burning questions, feel free to jump in. Sherry is at a conference. It's quite noisy where she is. So I will be doing most of the talking, and then I'll hand it over to Sherry for some comments around the technology side. But yeah, I'll just kick us off. So I will share a little bit about my background before talking about our project, just as a background. So I have a background in climate policy. I've always worked in the climate space. When I first started working out, I worked in the policy arena. So I worked for the Norwegian government for many years with their international climate policy team, working both bilaterally with partner countries, but also under the UNFCCC. Subsequently, I left the government and started working more on sort of trying to pressure companies to change, and did that through doing investigative reports, through naming and shaming, and then having done both of those and feeling that I wasn't really having the type of impact I was craving, then sort of shifted my lens towards climate litigation. And I believe there are a lot of the researchers in this group also that focus on climate justice. So I think this has sort of been an area that has emerged, and a lot of climate activists are focusing on climate justice and how legal tools can help create change and accountability in the system. And I think at large, some of the observations that I've done throughout my career is that there is a very big problem in terms of there's an accountability gap. Governments make promises, they set targets. Companies similarly also set targets and voluntary commitments, but there's really no good mechanisms to ensure that these actors are delivering on their goals. So I started looking at climate litigation about 6-7 years ago. 4 years ago, I founded an NGO called Clean Harvest. And the aim of Clean Harvest is really to develop strategic and innovative legal approaches to target companies and financial institutions that are causing environmental harm. I came to this sort of legal world having no legal background whatsoever. So there was a very steep learning curve. And one of the things that stood out to me while I was working on these projects was that the legal profession is extremely manual. It's very time consuming and also very costly. So as NGOs bringing these cases, in some instances, I needed to fundraise from 4 different foundations. And some of our cases, some of sort of the more pioneering cases that we brought, it took us 2 years to develop the legal theory, to gather the evidence. So a couple of years ago, I just started thinking, there surely must be ways of making this more efficient through technology. I don't have a deep understanding in technology. I'm not very tech savvy as a person, but even to me, it was clear that, while I do see that there's a lot of potential in climate litigation and using legal tools for accountability and climate action, and also to promote climate justice, this gap really needs to be addressed, because if we're continuing at the current pace and the available philanthropic money that's out there, while these tools could be powerful, it's just not going to be, we're not going to be able to progress at the pace needed and bring the amount of cases needed for companies to really understand that there is a downside to causing climate harm and then adjusting their behavior. So that's where Sherry comes in. So Sherry and I founded a startup called Jupiter Lex. I'm going to just briefly say a bit about Sherry. So Sherry has a background from Silicon Valley. She's an AI and data scientist. She's worked in some of the largest sort of tech startups and scale-ups in California, including Uber and Open Door. And we started working together last year to try to figure out, what are the possibilities from a technological point of view in creating more accountability and essentially focusing on some of the tasks that currently are done manually when bringing legal cases against climate litigation cases against companies and financial institutions. And we are a part of a climate tech incubator program called Carbon 13, based out of Cambridge. So since we spoke to you last, Claire, have gotten our first round of funding to build this. And we did a lot of interviews with law firms. So we're particularly focusing on law firms that are doing ESG litigation. And this is also an area that is still quite incipient, but it's growing rapidly. So there's been cases brought. There are currently 2 big cases, ongoing cases in front of English courts that address climate damage or environmental damage, rather, caused by multinational companies abroad. And you might have heard of them. One is the Shell case. Another one is a case against BHP, a mining company, where one of their dam tailings collapsed in Brazil. So there are law firms in London that are increasingly looking to take on these types of cases. So we had a series of interviews with these law firms to understand, what are their obstacles when bringing cases. And there were basically convergence around 3 areas. The first was identifying the legal breaches. So although there is a large, there are so many corporate violations, corporates routinely break laws. And we actually found some numbers out there indicating that this was a study from the US, that there's the rates of non-compliance when it comes to environmental regulation can go up to 70% in some sectors. So although corporates are routinely breaking the law, the lawyers don't really have a systematic way of identifying these legal breaches. The way that they're doing it is sort of word of mouth. Maybe they get tipped off by an NGO, or basically they just read the news. The second area where they are, having challenges is understanding the science. In some cases, they do need to have some basic understanding of, environmental science to be able to establish causality. And then the third area was connecting with victims. Some of these cases, the victims are in remote communities. They might not speak, they might just speak local languages or indigenous languages. The lawyers would, travel there multiple times to inform these, organize meetings, or, have translators. And also just like uploading the data digitally is something that is a hurdle. So essentially what we're trying to do currently, Sharon and I, is to address these gaps. And we want to, our vision is sort of to have a system where we could use software and AI to discover these corporate breaches in a systematic way. And then going forward, we also hope to, this is not the first thing that we're focusing at the moment, but we hope to also be able to establish partnerships with NGOs that work with local communities and can sort of report to this platform if there's a legal violation, and we could sort of match them with legal expertise that can help them take on their cases. And also, as a third step, we also, we've started some discussions, but this is probably not something that we will do as an immediate step, but also working with scientists to basically create a database that gives the lawyers access to environmental science in a format that they need to establish causality, because now they're just like reading through papers and they don't really know where to look, and they're sort of, it needs to be very in a specific format for it to be useful for them. I'll just show very briefly, like we didn't have a presentation. Well, I didn't do a presentation specific for this, but I have a couple of slides that I can just show you just to explain a little bit about yeah, so essentially these are the areas that we focus on. We've started doing some pilot work around the case discovery or the discovery of violations, and there are a broad range of different types of cases. And those cases, to detect those violations, you need to essentially monitor different types of data sources. So it can be corporate disclosures, it can be, news or NGO reports, and with time, you could also integrate satellite data. There's really good satellite data currently on deforestation, on methane leaks. So these are things that you can tap on in the future. We're currently looking at 2 pilots. I'll say these 2 things, and then I'll hand the word to Sherry to talk a little bit more about sort of the technology, because we're using a mix of sort of AI and software when we're doing this. So we have done 2 sort of proofs of concepts. We're working on 2 pilots. So we started with looking at something that we think would be the easiest, which is securities fraud, because it's just relies on text-based data. And we've done a proof of concept there, and analyzed a lot of funds, and we see that there's a large percentage of of these funds that have commitments, but at the same time are invested in oil and gas majors. The other thing we've done, I'll stop sharing because I don't have a slide for that, is some work around physical environmental damage in supply chains. So that's a bit more complicated and complex. We've done a few trials there where we tried to just essentially look at certain NGO websites and news sources that we knew, report on that, to sort of gather that data. It wasn't extremely successful, because although there's information out there, it's not necessarily about a specific violation. It can be quite generic information. So we're gonna try that again, and maybe focus on certain companies that we know are big mining companies, big oil and gas, or agricultural companies that we know have a high likelihood, or have a high frequency of violations. Yeah, so Sherry, do you want to just jump in here and maybe share your thoughts?
Yeah, I hope my background noise is not too bad. I am having an innovation zero conference in London today. UK AI, and yeah, like lots of interesting thoughts about how technology applies into this leading to the future of UK's net zero economy. So very interesting talks happening today. And primarily in the energy sector, and there's actually one talk I attended about how AI can help with the optimization of electricity and industrial systems. That was one of the interesting applications. I think when Anahita and I tried to come together to work on this idea around to use the AI as a tool to assist in the response of climate and environmental litigation. We're really taking kind of 2 parallel trends that are happening, both being kind of the legal, how essentially the legal and professional services is being revolutionized by the new developments in artificial intelligence, primarily generative AI, So from a technology perspective, natural language processing is nothing new. So technology was always developing. But in the past, lots of the essentially models created are very task specific. So with different like legal tasks to understand different um, documents, to extract different information. There's usually like very uniquely tuned models that are required and usually takes an experienced AI researcher weeks or even months to just to work on like just to create one model for one task. However, in kind of recent time, the development of large language models really has advanced the field of natural language processing a lot. So it is very general purpose and allow kind of very fast experimentation to happen across different types of documents, including, I think in our case, various sources of raw data as well as legal text. So I think what we are really trying to build in this domain is to solve the big data problem. So we're harnessing essentially the a vast amount of available kind of public data around kind of violations and kind of triangulating lots of data sources and trying to spot where kind of corporates are essentially conducting actions that are not that they specified not to be not something they should do, and trying to triangulate that with kind of past cases as well as legal taxonomies themselves. So really combine to create an expert assisted system so that um, we can dramatically reduce the amount of kind of human hours for mostly kind of junior lawyers, paralegals, so lots of the very manual work that they have to do. So yeah, I think that's what we're trying to create. So right now, I think we did a lot of like customer interviews and initial prototyping for the past few months. And yeah, like Anahita and I am really kind of more ready to go on to the next phase and really trying to build this into a workable product. Yeah.
If I can just add one last thing to what Sherry said, she was talking about the capabilities of AI and like the different large language models. I think one thing that it's interesting to me for someone who doesn't have a technology background is how you can break up the tasks in very granular steps and essentially have a combination of software and AI, so you can sort of mitigate the risks of the AI getting things wrong or hallucinating I didn't know this, but apparently with software you can code for very specific tasks, so it doesn't have very high levels of flexibility, but it's quite accurate if you're telling it to do something. Whereas their large language model has more creativity and has more flexibility, and but the downside is that it could sort of hallucinate things. And we're looking into when we're asking it to do certain tasks, that we sort of break it down, and then we have different parts of the task done either through a software or an LLM to optimize it. And I mean, we're also learning a lot. We're for the greenwashing one, the legal guidance is not necessarily so black and white, so we also sort of are testing, can the LLM rate the funds in terms of most misleading to least misleading. So it's sort of a very interesting and iterative process. And I think the legal domain is also an interesting part, arena to play with this, because it's both, the level of precision needs to be very high, but at the same time, when you look at laws and legal strategies, there's a lot of sort of gray zones. So yeah, we're also sort of grappling with that.
Great. I mean, thank you so much,
And
both of you. Oh, sorry, Cherry, did you want to jump in?
I already saw the problem popping up, but I'll let Claire finish your.
No, just to throw it open for questions. But if you would like to add something, then obviously carry on.
Yeah, so I think Artie's question around how the LLM is trained. So today, for Jupiter Lex as a startup, we are not currently training our own models yet. So we're not doing domain specific models yet. We're primarily leveraging, state of art models from, OpenAI, Anthropic, and other providers. And we're doing primarily retrieval augmented generation work, as well as kind of these more OM specific pipelines. So more so leveraging the models in the inference step. However, this is where we are looking a lot further into the future. Is that possibly we will be creating some of the kind of most likely post training to uh, to for the domain specific kind of tasks if that was good question.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, we've got a good half an hour for questions. So if anyone wants to share questions or comments, please raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Yeah, we very much want to pick this discussion on, so not necessarily a question or any thoughts you have, any recommendations of, hey, these are interesting things you've seen, or even like organizations we might get in touch with, or maybe students who are interested in the topic and hope to kind of, even do some like a little bit of collaboration. So I think all of those will be very interesting to us as we're at the like starting out stage.
Yeah, so it doesn't need to be any questions. If you have any thoughts or comments, is also they're also welcome.
Oh, Artie?
Sorry, I feel like I'm asking a lot of good questions. This is really very interesting and so needed. I think Claire and I were talking at some point about supply chains and remediation and like where is the data? It's just not there, the sort of data you need. So I think thank you for doing this. It's really hard. And I want like when, especially around the stuff of supply chains, like so what sort of data sources would be useful? Because I'm almost thinking that some of your data could be very helpful in redesigning insurance products, for example. Thinking about what kind of risks, where, how, especially for sort of more upstream actors in supply chains, when you're thinking about like in mining or agriculture, where the externalities are really high. So do you have any thoughts around something like that?
Yeah, so I think for the supply chains piece, I think there's sort of a very short-term game and then there's like the very long-term game. So I think for the short term, what we're probably going to do is just to rely on sort of existing research that's out there on like someone did some research around the company that somehow is linked to, a European actor, so that because the litigation probably is going to mean that it be take place in Europe. So we won't be doing that sort of supply chain mapping ourselves at this point. But I think with time, you can create, through something that's called like network analysis. So the AI can sort of connect the dots around different supply chain actors. And I think as the our base of data grows, we'll have, past cases where we knew, you can essentially have a database where you have information historic or more accurate in terms of supply chain links that you've gathered through other things. And then, you could have that have an intelligence platform that has that. And so if you have a new, detect a new violation in a smaller company, you already have that underlying data of the connections to that company. And I think, I used to do this research manually when I was doing sort of the reports and the investigations on the companies. And there's obviously some data sets that are, you just need to rely on, and depends also from country to country. So, some countries have good data on, they have public data on infrastructure maps. So you can find, mines, you can find silos, you can find ports, and then some countries don't have that. But I think that's going to be sort of a different parts of this puzzle piece that I think with time that we're going to hopefully have a very good intelligence platform where we can also sort of provide that data to for example, insurance. But that's going to be sort of the more long game.
I feel like I've had an advantage. I've already been able to talk to Anahita and Sherry about their work in detail. So, but I do I was wondering as you were talking, and this might sort of show my ignorance of AI, but in terms of the data which you're actually gathering, is it largely kind of news reports? What is the kind of evidence which you kind of collate to be able to identify where there's been violations? And so, and is there a sort of a geography to the data which you can gather? Like, is there much more data available around violations, say, in European or North American jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. This is actually one of the core pieces. It's probably, I would say, the most core pieces of the technology we're trying to develop in this case. Like the higher the quality of the data, the higher the relevance, right, the better results we'll be able to provide. And I think what we are like we're especially trying to collect all kinds of data, not just from like a first principle perspective of where we based on experience, where the kind of violation information and it tends to live, as well as collecting from our potential clients around, hey, what do you look at? As a legal professional to source and as your preference to tell for various cases. So that's kind of where we are starting with. Today, the source, I think we have not down to the first-hand source yet. We are primarily, as we're starting out, so kind of putting up essentially the table stake sets of data that's based off news, NGO reports, and like government and regulator filings. So, for example, one thing we were just looking at is to look at kind of regulatory investigation into companies. So UK CMA, US FTC. So looking at their investigations and what that leads them, what kind of related information that we could collect around the cases they are already, essentially the actors they're already putting an eye on, and kind of gathering that evidence chain. So that's where we are starting with. What we're hoping to do is to essentially create essentially like data lakes and almost kind of data graphs step by step. So as we branch out into either jurisdiction or an area of law or kinds of specific actors, and kind of create the sets of data that are very related to this the specific type we're targeting, and hoping to kind of build things up. So for example, like one like today we're very much playing this trade we're very much trying to weigh this trade-off between the relevance and the timeliness of the information and the quality. So one source, for example, that is quite valuable in social media, right? Like I think from our interviews and our experience, a lot of times like violations get reviewed firsthand in social media groups or kind of local groups first. However, that is it both a vast amount of data and potentially like it could include like misinformation or potentially just less relevant and like and lower quality data. So so I think how we can solve those issues are still like all pending questions. Yeah.
I'll just add to that last comment of Sherry, where she's talking about sort of the relevance and the reliability of the data. Obviously, if you have sources closer to the ground, you're going to get that information more frequently. You're going to get it faster, but then the reliability is an issue. One thing that we haven't done, but we've had some conversations, is with platforms or NGOs that are developing platforms or apps for local communities that can sort of document environmental harm over time. So I was speaking to one organization where they have like this app that works in an offline environment, and that the sort of indigenous groups or local communities can take photos, take voice recordings, and this is obviously something that would be extremely useful from a legal perspective, and that you could really get that first-hand information. We don't really want to do that or partner with these actors until we have some traction and we know that there's going to be someone on the other end actually interested in taking on the cases. But that's something that we want to explore sort of down the line, and which could be good to sort of create that more direct link between those impacted and those that are able to take on the cases.
Great, thank you. John, you've got your hand up. Do you like to?
Thanks, Claire and Yusra, for hosting this space. To our colleagues, I just had a question on my mind. Do you have a sense, or how do you envision potentially collaboration with, for example, the University of Manchester? So in what specific ways does the university provide value in a collaboration? In what ways can the company bring something to the university? There's ways that universities do collaborate, right? KTPs, funded PhDs, consultancy, commissioned reports, co-grants, all sorts of stuff. And just wondering what's on your mind for thinking about, a roadmap forward potentially, if that's even something.
Was that a question for us or for Claire or your colleagues?
No, for the two of you.
Yeah. Thanks for that, John. We actually, in an earlier, it probably was early last year, almost applied for a UKRI grant together with the University of Glasgow, the law department. So in the end, we didn't submit the proposal because the deadline was too short, and we didn't, we were all busy. But that was with a law professor and another professor that worked. He was, I guess, also in the legal department, working on LLMs for legal purposes, which was around it was on around the violation detection aspect of our work. So we are just to say that that's one thing that we were looking into, and we're very open to collaborating with the universities or individual researchers that are interested in this topic. And I think our advantage is that we're very early stage, so we're doing a lot of exploration, which I guess it's also what researchers do. So yeah, we'd be very happy to discuss that.
Isra?
Thank you so much for what was a really great presentation. And I agree with RT that this is something really needed right now and that I think could revolutionize climate litigation in many ways, domestic and international level. I just had a question. So in a lot of the discourse about AI at the moment, there are a lot of concerns about like bias in how the models are developed. And I wondered just if that's something that you've given any thought. Well, I mean, I'm sure you have, but I guess I'm just wondering how you think this relates specifically, or how do you think this is relevant in the climate context, and if it has somehow factored into some of the work that you've been developing. Thanks.
Yeah, it is. It is a great question. I think AI ethics and kind of impact of AI on the world, and it is kind of a topic that we have always been considering. It's been in mind. Um, I would say we don't have a perfect solution yet. I think lots of people are, and very smart people are still searching for this solution. I think what we are doing as a company is that we are, in terms of like right now, things we are using leveraging third parties, pre-trained models. We are selecting ones that are, ethically training their model. Well, and I think like Anthropic, for example, being one of the companies that use federated training methods to ensure their data inputs are sourced from ethics, are sourced ethically. That's been our one of our preferred kind of providers for foundation models. And I think another aspect of us developing AI technology on top of that is to ensure we are sourcing data in an ethical way. So yeah, so like we are not doing, just meaningless scraping of the web, of all of the web. And we're trying to use whether it's open source technology and open data sources that we're using. We are always paying attention to kind of the licensing and and all of those. Yeah, I think those are kind of the primary actions we are taking right now. But like as we develop our technology and to kind of common practices around the AI development matures, this is definitely an area we're always looking into. Yeah, and I, it could also be an area that researchers or like students are interested in, can give us some guidance and help. That would be very much appreciated asset.
Any other questions, comments?
I had a quick. Do you think you'll make any of your data public, like public ever, or at least in terms of like some sort of public interface where parts of the data can be downloaded, or at least in a codified format?
Yes, we've had this discussion extensively. Yeah, so I mean, Sharon and I even had like discussions on sort of, is this a commercial thing? Is it a nonprofit? What is it? And I think we sort of landed it's a commercial thing because we think that the large law firms are the ones that have the money, and those are the ones that can bring really cases at scale. So we need to tap into that. But we definitely envision parts of the platform being open to NGOs that want to pursue litigation. So when we gather data on violations, not all of those violations are going to be interesting for lawyers. So there's, a whole array of types of litigation that's, just NGOs would take on. And that's something that we want to make available to civil society and, even individuals that are interested in pursuing that.
I just like related to that, I wondered is there a particular jurisdiction where you think that these cases are most viable? And does
Yeah.
that kind of influence your project and
Yeah.
your tools you're developing?
Yeah, so that's also a very good question, because I mean, people like you guys that know climate litigation, one of the most important factors is like the choice of jurisdiction, right? So you have to be very strategic in the choice of jurisdiction. So the US has historically been the best jurisdiction for these cases. If you look at the number of climate litigation cases, it's the US that is the leading jurisdiction. And then followed by Europe. Europe has had some sort of more recent regulatory developments, which is projected to lead to a growth in these cases. So there's been changes in terms of what's called collective redress in Europe, which is class action in the US. So European citizens have the EU has developed a framework for collective redress that makes it easier for European citizens, or to bring these types of cases, not even European citizens, but to use the legal system in these jurisdictions to bring these types of cases. I mean, you all are aware of the CSDDD, which we hoped would lead to a growth of these cases in European jurisdictions, which unfortunately has been butchered now. But there is definitely a trend where you see that these cases are coming increasingly in front of European courts. In terms of the best jurisdictions in Europe, so some numbers suggest the UK, although for some types of litigation, I would say that France and the Netherlands are better than the UK. But definitely, those three, because it's, we're London based and it's a UK English company, we will be focusing on the UK as our first market, but then looking at other European jurisdictions. So yeah, the Netherlands and France, I think, are the best ones. We would be focusing also on, cases that are transnational. So where the damage has happened in other jurisdictions. I mean, there will be cases, because there's going to be a variety of cases. Of course, if you're looking at ESG securities frauds, the victims in those cases are going to be shareholders, so they probably going to be in Europe anyways. But if you look at sort of the more supply chain cases or the physical damage cases, the victims are going to be in mostly where there's, a lot of biodiversity, or, where there's mining or agricultural activities that are causing environmental harm. So the hotspots for sort of harm are going to be outside Europe.
I feel like I'm monopolizing the question time, but I guess I got a kind of follow-up question to that. In terms of these cases being transnational, does that kind of shape the data which you're gathering? I would assume that the data you collect is not necessarily limited to transnational, or it would, I don't know. I guess, could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think it really depends on where the area. So I think when I was showing you the slides, I was showing you like different types of violations. So it was like, water pollution. I think it was ESG securities fraud. It was like forever chemicals. So I think it's going to depend on the type of cases that we start with and start building this with. And I think it's going to be a factor of the choices we make, but also a factor of initially where can the technology give us results. So as of now, we're focusing sort of building these two pilots, one on ESG securities fraud. That was the first one we started with, which sort of is an easier one from a technological perspective. And then the second one is sort of physical climate harm or environmental harm. And then when we started to look at that, we started with mining. And of course, if we go into build something specifically focused on mining, that's going to be a lot of those cases are going to be transnational. because A, our market, the lawyers we would be selling them to would be in Europe, and then B, I'm not really sure, like from a legal perspective, if any of those jurisdictions would be sort of a good jurisdiction to bring a case. And yeah, so I think that depending on sort of, as of now, we sort of have one on the securities fraud, which is not transnational, but then the supply chain one is, and I think, so just the last thing on that, I think that, you know, we have to strike a balance, because Sherry and I are doing this because we sort of want to have an impact, and but also because this is sort of, we want to tap into, you know, well-resourced actors to help us with this and selling this to law firms. There, we have to sort of have a balance from cases that are easy to win, that the lawyers are going to be interested in, that's going to generate revenue so we can keep ourselves afloat, and our reason for going into this, like, you know, if you know, so of course we're more drawn to sort of the cases where we see that there's a higher impact, or the disadvantaged communities being impacted, and you know, that's going to be something that we really want, you know, are drawn to doing, because that aligns a lot with our mission. But then at the same time, because it's sort of a venture, we need to sort of balance that out, and we need to think about the economic health and the longevity, and our, you know, what is going to enable us to keep this going. So that's a trade-off or a balance that we need to create. But I think, you know, yeah, we also don't want to lose sight of what our ultimate mission is. And I think a lot of those transnational cases are sort of something that we're drawn to because what we're hoping to achieve. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It makes a lot of sense, and yeah, highlights the challenges with financing these cases more broadly. Any more thoughts? Or
I think that's clear. Like you point out this like very third point, which is like the cases take time. The cases like aside from the technology assistable part, so there is still a very much like a human part. Is like today courts are not accelerated that much by technology yet. I think there are a lot of talks about how it could be accelerated, but I think those like still or the cases take you know, years to mature. And there needs to be a way that funds the justice, funds the essentially opens the door to justice. So that's very much kind of a way where I think for what we are building, and I think probably a lot on this team's mind is to how that can be sourced, and what are the ways to ensure this access to justice happens. Yeah, not a very I yeah, I personally don't think there's a great answer to it, but I think we are essentially like trying to essentially try all the ways that are possible, and we want to be kind of part of this um accelerating force to ensure kind of we democratize, we lower the hurdles that you know, people who are affected by corporate violations can access justice.
thanks, John. Yeah, great. I mean, it's a super interesting topic, and clearly things are changing rapidly. And I think there's so much is changing, not only in the legal world, but obviously in the tech world, and bringing those together is super exciting. We've got a little bit more time for any more questions. Otherwise, we can draw to a close. Speak now.
Yeah, I think Claire, feel free to share our emails and any follow-up conversations or interest or if you meet anyone who might be interested in chatting with us in various ways, our doors are open.
Yeah, I will do. That's fantastic. I'll also share on we have a group page and LinkedIn page. So make sure that your details are out there. I think it's been fascinating, and it's really exciting to see how these things are developing. So thanks so much for sharing your work, and great to hear you've got a grant. That's fantastic. Well done. Okay.
And thank you again, Claire, for organizing it, and thanks for all the great questions, everyone.
Thank you so much. We'll be having another seminar coming up, I think. We'll share the details soon via the email list, and we've also got a workshop coming up with local environmental activists, so we'll be circulating details around that too. So please keep an eye on the emails. And yeah, once again, thank you so much, Anahita and Sherry, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hello, darling.
Oh, one sec, let me just stop the recording.
Oh.